Michelle,
Roseanne.
we are here to talk about something that I know has been on your heart for a really long time. And I've been super excited about sharing it as well because you have a new book out called The Way of Fertility. Awaken your reproductive potential through the power of ancient wisdom. I feel like this book should be leather bound for some reason. Like, I really get that impression with
It's
that
like old
title. Like,
school.
yeah, it needs to be that. So I'm really delighted to have you on and share this wisdom with my audience because I know that this has been a labor of love for you. So why don't you start off by sharing with the ladies listening a little bit about what inspired you to actually write a book? Because that's life-changing shit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Roseanne. And I think it's just over time you start to feel a message coming through you, and then of course you're learning a lot with the craft that you're working with and the tools that you're working, and like that's really over time. I was just like, okay, I'm repeating the same thing, and I would like to put this into a craft, and I've into one book. But I also I always felt like I have a book in me somewhere. It was always something that was on my mind. And then finally it started getting clearer and more clearer and more clearer. And then finally I was like, okay, I got to get this stuff down. And that's pretty much what it was. It felt like when I started the podcast, same thing. It was just like, I have to do that. And I just kind of answered the call and I was like, okay, I'm going to answer the call and figure it out later. And that's what I did, like step by step. And then eventually, wrote it. And as you know, since you've done this many times, you start to write it and then you're like, oh, I forgot to put this in, or this needs to go in. Oh my God, yes. And then this story needs to go in. And pretty much that's how it progressed and it is now out there.
Oh, I'm so excited for you because once this starts, Michelle, it doesn't stop. There's going
I'm
to be
already thinking about number 2.
there's going to be a freaking trilogy at least. Well, so talk to us a little bit about now that we know the inspiration, what are some of your favorite messages? Because it's a meaty book. It's a meaty book. It's 256 pages, which is great because I kind of when I was looking through it, it really, I mean, there's so many stories and it almost felt like a really beautiful, well articulated manual of sorts. Like not like a recipe book, but really a manual for women to start understanding the elements that go into their fertility. So I'd love it if you would share a little bit about like what are some of the key messages?
Yes. So I'll start with just kind of like an overall perspective that I wanted to address, which is I see this all the time. I have people come in, they're like, I'm doing all the supplements, I'm doing all the food, I'm doing all this. And then while they're talking to me, of course, I'm seeing it from the lens of Chinese medicine. And I'm like, their nervous system is out of whack as they're telling me all this. I could feel their nervous system. It's just a part, it's like a feel. You start to develop a sixth sense when you start to do a certain type of healing. So that Chinese medicine works a little bit more subtly on the energetic aspect of the person. And we work a lot on the flow of the body and allowing that flow to nourish all the different parts of the body. However, when we are not in flow, and that is when we're trying to force or we're thinking of things more from a yang perspective, the yin and the yang, I cover that in the book. So yin is basically more receptive, it's more feminine, it's more inert. And yang is more active, more fire, more energy. And so it's more male dominant energy. So we need both. We need both in all of nature. Both need to be present in order for nature to thrive. Nature, by meaning nature, not just nature that we see outside in the trees, but our bodies as well, because we are part of that extension of that. So when we're always young, like just young energy, we burn ourselves out. And that really does have an impact on how we sleep and how our bodies rest and how our bodies balance hormones, because we need the rest and we need our nervous system in check to feel balanced and to work well. So when I see that people are so focused on kind of like the material aspects and the doing and the going constantly and not really looking within as to, wait a second, what's happening inside? Like, what's happening in my mind? How am I feeling? Like, what are the thoughts that I'm having? Do I believe in myself? Do I give myself enough time to rest? Do I give enough time for my mind to wander? And so that's pretty much, I forget the exact question, and I hope I'm not totally going on a tangent, but that was pretty much like what I was thinking. And a lot of the ancient teachings, all of the ancient wisdom, they all point us to go within. And that's kind of like a riddle. It's almost like you see these little riddles or little like pointers and signs and paths. They don't tell you the exact answer, but they tell you go within, you'll find the answer. So this is one of the things that you see. You see it in Buddhism, you see it in the Vedas, a lot of the traditions. And Chinese medicine is based on Taoism, which means the way, hence the way of fertility. And when you live in accordance with the way, which is the balance really of the yin and the yang, having those two working together, that effortless effort. So you're efforting, but effortlessly. We just talked about this with your manifestation. We're just talking about that as the key of manifestation. And like when things start to flow, that flow state is where it starts to feel effortless, but yet you're still getting your desire. So right. This was the biggest thing that I see missed everywhere. It's like missed to have more self-care. It's all of that aspect. Like, how am I feeling within? Am I energy rich, or am I doing this from a depleted state and just running ragged, trying to get everything done? You know, so it's really coming back to ourselves, coming back to our core, coming back to our home and our own nature. This is really what's waiting for us. So yes, I do give a lot of details on how to get there. And it sounds very abstract. You know, when people hear about like, what does that mean? And that's kind of the point, is that when we're in this young state, we're trying to make meaning out of everything. We're trying to understand, dissect. And sometimes it's about coming back and observing, watching, allowing, receiving. And so that, if that is totally ignored, then we're missing the point. We could do all of the things and we're going to like be disappointed because we're not allowing ourselves that rest state. We're not allowing ourselves to get more in the yin state. So, you know, so that was really the core message. And of course, I cover many different things. The biggest thing, I think, I guess if I can name one thing, the biggest thing that I feel the strongest is a returning to our heart state, our love, and like really getting back into that state of love and coming back to our heart. And I describe it actually with research and studies that yes, it actually does impact fertility to get into that state. You could look at things like heart math and how our heart and brain do have a very, very important communication and relationship. And Chinese medicine has always said the heart houses the brain. This was never something that was really acknowledged in Western medicine until now. And it's not even Western medicine, it's more modern science. It's not necessarily Western medicine, it's its own thing. Heart Math Institute is its own thing. And they're starting to research this. And they're seeing that our heart actually extends, the heart's frequency extends further. The electromagnetic waves extend further than the brain. We put so much emphasis on the brain, which again is more the yang, and then we don't put enough on the heart. And so the heart might be even more important than the brain.
You know,
even though they're both.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you said that, because I remember reading something about the heart and how the electrical, like all of the electrical impulses that in your heart, like if I can't remember what the measurement was, but it was some astronomical number. And there's even a book called The Heart Is Not a Pump, like written by an MD, that was talking about how we have completely botched our interpretation of what's important, exactly as you were talking about, the way that we value the brain more than the heart, even the metaphorical heart, right? Like not just the muscle in our chest, but the metaphorical heart of our knowing, our being, our longings, things like that, that we subordinate those things to what we've been conditioned to believe is more logical and linear, and therefore the superior measure of what things are, what the value of things are. And that's decidedly young. It's like
Yes.
decidedly young. I mean, well, and it's funny because when I was going through your book and I was thinking about all this, I remembered it took me back to a time when I hated Chinese medicine. And it's not because it was bad, it was because Chinese medicine required me to have a paradigm shift.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I was stuck in the allopathic medicine paradigm that we are this pile of parts and one part had nothing to do with the other. So when I was exploring Chinese medicine and I was going to see a practitioner in San Francisco, it was hilarious because she was asking me things that I was like, what the hell does that have to do with my uterus? And like, what does this have to do with that? She was asking me questions and eliciting awareness about things that I didn't believe had any connection, but they do. And you explain it in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, we both went to Dr. Joe Dispenza. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about what, I forget his name, Doctor, it's like at the tip of my tongue. One of his researchers, what was his name? Dr. Do you remember?
Hemmel, Dr. Hemmel.
Yes. So Dr. Hemmel mentions, and he goes, well, the WTF method, because they don't really know how to describe his method. It's not quite meditation. It's like its own thing. I personally think the way he works is he really trains your mind to navigate your internal terrain, to work out that imagination and that visualization. He doesn't call it that. He doesn't like to call it that, but to see it and to really, the more you do it, it's like a muscle. So you're constantly training that inner terrain to see it. But then he really brought it down to two things. He said, it's not just thoughts, it's emotions. It's state of emotional, like a heightened awareness and also heightened emotions. So when you're elevating your emotions and you're also focusing your thoughts, that in combination is what creates changes in a person's body. And we're talking people that are coming in with like stage 4 cancer and then going into remission, their body's completely shifting, changing. People walking out of wheelchairs that were told by allopathic medicine doctors, you cannot, what you have, like, there's no way, it's only going to get worse. And so, and not to poo-poo anybody, they're learning that's how they've been taught about certain types of conditions that are neurological. And so how in the world are people changing their bodies completely? Like, it's insane. And those two, which I found so fascinating, because you hear a lot about affirmations. Why do they work for some people and not others? Maybe because it's just saying empty words with no emotion. We're not matching that emotion with the words that we're saying. And so having that combination, that's like the power couple, the thoughts and emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I think and I know you talk about this in the book, is that I had no understanding at all that, of the electrical, like the field that, we exert. I had no idea that there was this whole meridian system that, that was in our bodies. Like it was it's tragic in a sense. Like when I think back on how ignorant I was and the gift that Chinese medicine gave me of beginning to understand not only that these parts come together, but there's this very intricate meridian system that if we have blocks in certain places, energy gets stuck, and that there are very real consequences for that. And what I love about the way that you teach and the way that you've written this book is you're not only explaining this, but you're really talking women through some initial solutions for how to address that. I mean, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. I think to myself, like when I work with people in person, what we work on is flow ultimately. Like if you get the body in a state of flow physically, then it will start to function better. It will start to heal itself. It'll bring all the resources where they need to go because it's able to flow. So it will heal itself. So ultimately, I think the biggest surprise is that Chinese medicine doesn't heal, it's the body that heals. All it does is it facilitates a place of an environment that is conducive to healing. It allows the body to get into a state of healing. And ultimately, I think the core message of the book is that you are actually born to reproduce. Your body has a blueprint. It's like, it's done. That was the intention from the beginning. So like what got out of alignment? You know, for me, it was like years of irregular menstrual cycles. And I thought, since I went through it for 12 years, there's no way I could shift it because that's just how my body is. That's the biggest bullshit that anybody could like believe. That's just how I am. That's just how my body is. For 12 years, I had that. And it wasn't even like, it was 12 years when I was young, when my body should have like corrected itself. It didn't. So I went through 12 years of that. I could have said, okay, that's just the way it is. It's never, based on my history, my first 12 years of menstruating, this is going to be me forever. And it wasn't. I was like a derailed train. My track, I was off the tracks. Chinese medicine helped me get back on the tracks. And then boom, I still, to this day, I'm 50. I don't mind telling people, but till this day, I have monthly bleeds and they are regular, and I don't always get acupuncture, even though I give acupuncture. So my point is that my body got on track. At one point, I did not have to get regular acupuncture. It stayed on track. So it's like, what is it that we need to go back on track for? You are meant to be, you have the blueprint to reproduce. Every single thing in nature has a seed. Okay, this is our nature. This is our birthright. We are meant to reproduce. So like, what is it? And how do we get back to that intelligence that got us there in the first place?
Wow. You know, that's super freaking empowering. Like when you think about Chinese medicine, what it's basically saying, and what you have said here is that it's Chinese medicine is basically a way of facilitating the body's own natural ability to heal, and that this is a natural state for us to be fertile, for us to reproduce. And it's only when we're out of that natural state that we find ourselves in chaos. And I think, you know, the other thing that's really interesting and why you can speak with so much authority, like in addition to all of the letters that come after your name, you actually lived in dysregulation for a very long time and could see for yourself how quickly things could get regulated. I mean, because it's so easy for us. I mean, the messaging that we get across the board in the mainstream is that, oh, well, if you have this, it's over. And you and I both saw, like when we were at that Dispenza event, a guy with like stage 4 brain tumor, like he took control of his own body. And then when they did another scan, and this was at UCSD, no chump change school, like a legitimate, you know, teaching school when it comes to medicine and like research and all this other stuff. Like they're asking big questions. What they saw was just scar tissue from what had been the tumor. And that tumor was like, peace out, we're done, you know? And it's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
That what you're underscoring here and really a significant portion of the messaging is, look, ladies, there is a way for you to heal this. And I'm betting that you've probably seen some pretty miraculous shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Defies the odds. I mean, things that defy the odds that we're told like, no way, based on inflammation, based on like diseases that they were fighting, basically autoimmune diseases and conditions, and just based on like a lot of people telling them there's no way, like egg donor, like, you know, all the things. And nothing against egg donors. I've had people who have had egg donors and are so happy. So it's nothing against that. It's more the fact that these people knew that that wasn't their story.
Mm.
You know?
Well, and it's such a young thing to try to make things so black and white, right? Like
Oh,
to
big time.
not allow for the subtlety that you know, that somebody saying that they're not down for a particular modality means that it's because it's a judgment on that. It's not a judgment. It's simply a personal preference. Like why? Like I think it's such an interesting thing that we have such a young base society anyway, which is, I think, another really cool thing about your book is it's really giving women an opportunity to take a look at their own fertility through a very different lens. And by looking at their fertility through that different lens, they're going to see different opportunities. They're going to see very different messaging about their innate power to heal.
Big time. And I'm going to say this. When I healed, this is how I know. This is how you become like whatever healer or person, facilitator. You become it by going through it. I know you know what I'm talking about. When I went through it, and I went through it with my menstrual problems, when I found Dr. Lee around the same time, I was also reading The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. Totally blew my mind. I was like, what the heck? And then it was around that same time, I was also like, because of my physical flow, it empowered my mental flow. I was ready, listen to this, to finally take ownership of my shit. And this is what really, honestly, that was what threw everything. It was like responsibility for how I'm thinking, what I'm doing, my inner terrain, finally like stepping into it. And let me tell you, that was the single greatest, most empowering step I've taken in my life. And it felt like I was admitting defeat or admitting something was wrong or I did something wrong. No, it was the most empowering thing I could do for my life. And I was like, that was where my power stood. And it felt like by acknowledging those things that I was almost not being in my power. We all know what that means, right? We feel like we're admitting we're wrong.
Right. Well, but I think that what you're describing, and it coincides so beautifully with the nature of Chinese medicine, is the inward path, like looking inward, is that we've been conditioned to believe that being wrong is a bad thing. What if being wrong is simply an invitation to the next level, to say that, and when I say the next level, I mean the next level of awareness. So that we're saying, hey, this is not working. This, I am not correct about this. So what more do I need to learn? And really approaching that from a place of openness, because exactly as you were saying early on in our conversation here, the yin is receptive, and part of what we have to be in order to succeed on this journey is receptive. Conceiving is all about receiving. I yell about that all the time. But when you're in a super hardcore yang masculine mode, you're not open to receiving. It's super fucking defensive. It's super limited. And it's more about just controlling chaos rather than being a creator, because the yin is the creative and the receptive. And to be able to say, hey, what do I want in this situation? Like creating as opposed to reacting. And
100%.
Yeah. And it just puts you in a much more empowered position.
Oh, big time. Because you own the power.
Right. Right. Do you have any, like, I know you have probably a ton, but were there any transformations that you have witnessed in your own practice that really just blew your mind? Like, I know that, there's women that were told, like, no chance and all this other stuff, but is there any one that really stands out to you that can really illustrate this for women? Because I think one of the most cool ways that we learn is through story. And I know you've got tons of them, but is there one that really stands out to you as particularly demonstrative of what you're teaching in this book?
I mean, yeah, I guess there's one. There's so many. I'm like trying to think which one do I want to talk about. But one of them who was young, I mean, she was for 4 years never conceived on her own. And she's tried IVF, it didn't work, and then changed doctors. And I think that there was a point where she was just like starting to feel at ease or making the decision. We talked about like meditation and doing things outside of the Chinese medicine. I worked a lot on her nervous system, and I just felt like there was a piece where she really like I could see this shift for some reason, and I'm not sure if it was because she changed doctors or she felt more at ease or she felt like she was more aligned, but she just like like it was there was this effortlessness that I kind of felt. And sometimes I feel like that has to ripen, if that makes sense. I feel like
Mm,
sometimes the resistance has its purpose and a place, if that makes sense. So it's not
yeah.
that resistance is bad per se. It has a role. Like everything could be used, like everything in nature could be used. You know, like the Native Americans or people would take the tree or the fruit or whatever and use every single part of it. Same thing with us. Even the things that we can like say are bad or causing suffering, even those things can act as fertilizer for our souls, you know? So I felt like she was just at this right place, and she was at peace, she was at ease, she was ready to go into her transfer because she had a successful retrieval after. And lo and behold, after 4 years of never and of trying but never even getting pregnant, she just naturally conceived.
Mm, well, and the crazy thing about that is people will call that luck. And I think that's one of the most disrespectful, demeaning things is to tell somebody that they were lucky
Because
or
it's
that it
like
was just
saying that it's random. It's just
yeah, it's
no
not
intelligence behind that.
yeah, it's not random. She
Yeah.
changed. She made a
Yeah.
change. And I that's why I think it's so just demeaning. Just, oh, you got lucky. Lucky? I got 4 years of suffering behind this, bruh. Like
Yeah.
let's look at this and let's look at the changes. And I think what's really interesting too, which I'd love, because I know that the women listening would love to hear more about this because you've mentioned it a couple times, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about it, is how does somebody know? And this may be very obvious to us, but maybe for somebody that doesn't, is not familiar with this, how does somebody know if their nervous system is dysregulated or cuckoo?
That's a really good question. Um, if you're the kind of person that can't relax. And I'm not saying this in a demeaning way at all. Like
Yeah.
I'm really not. It's just like
It's
if
self-aware. It's self-aware, Michelle. Like we can
yeah,
all be
if
honest.
you're
We're
just
all
like
big girls
I
here.
can't relax. If you get bored easily, you can't like be in a place of like of peace or quiet. If you have a hard time falling asleep, you can't turn it off, or you wake up in the middle of the night, your mind's just going off. That's basically irregular nervous system. It's just your nervous system needs to oscillate healthily from being really active to being really passive and restorative. So if you can shift from that, like where you're going from a state of sleep to awake, awake to asleep, and you're able to go into that transition like easily and smoothly, so there's no turbulence, then that would say that's a normal, regulated nervous system where you're able to shift. But and you look at like when you're younger, you're active and then you can fall asleep, you're just like out. And that's how your body is meant to be. And then over time, we start to shift away from our nature because we stop listening to our bodies, or we overstimulate, or we over exercise or under, and I talk about that a lot in the book because all of this stuff is so intuitive. Because our bodies communicate with us. That's how our bodies are supposed to know how to survive without doctors. Like that is nature. It's it's not meant to, like, doctors are a man-made thing. It is natural for us to have that as a society, and even like shamans back in the day, to assist. But our bodies are only focused on survival, and they want to do this automatically. So like if you get a cut, it will create a little Band-Aid in the form of a scab. So your bodies are actually designed to survive and to thrive. And so they're doing that through communication. Our nervous system is really like a communication circuit system. And so when we're breaking that communication, we stop listening, then that's where we start to get a disconnect. The good news is that since you are hardwired, literally, to connect with that communication, you will go back to it fairly easier than you expect if you allow for that time. And my thing is just allowing for that time to connect with that infinite intelligence. And the only way we could do that is if we listen. We have to be receptive. We have to allow it to download into our being.
As you're saying that, I just want to dance. I just want to dance. I'm like,
dance,
girl, preach. I mean, but what that is, and I don't think this can be emphasized enough, is it's all within us. And the only thing that's keeping us from having what it is that we want is us and our resistance to being different. We get so addicted.
We're trying to control it.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to control it. But we also get addicted to what we see as normalcy and routine. We're afraid of the unknown because, I mean, this is why this journey is such a gift. And, is that it's an opportunity for us to wake up from the slumber of what we have been, I believe, oppressed with, this idea of this normalcy, when that normalcy is actually mediocrity. When you think about how beautiful our bodies are and the innate mechanisms that we have within us, as you were describing, to heal and to be in optimal health, it's really only when we add these outside things to it and we tell stories about what we can or can't do, or we accept from on high what, our statistics are and what's appropriate for our age and, and all that we take on stories that are just untrue and we get disconnected from that. And I love that everything that you are about and everything this book is about is returning the power to where it belongs. And that's each of us as individuals. And once you have that information, then it's up to you to take responsibility for your health. I mean, it's beautiful.
Thank you. And the image that I think about often is, when you're little, you're trying to catch a ball, right? And when you try too hard, you focus too hard, and you're just like, you get so, your conscious mind takes over, you want to control it. And then other times you're not even thinking, you're like passing by, somebody threw a ball in your hand, lands exactly where it needs to go. And then when you try too hard, all of a sudden the ball hits you in the head. Like, what's the difference? Right? There's this one level of, if I just like let go, then I'm allowing myself to depend on this like infinite intelligence, my subconscious mind, my instinct. And I allow that. But when I think too much, or I try too hard, or I focus too hard, and same thing with taking a test, or when you're about to talk to somebody, if you over rehearse, like then it just doesn't do well. It's not natural. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't flow. Right. So part of that flow is that dance that we have with this infinite intelligence. Is a co-creation. If we can't have a co-creation, if we want to just take the whole creation in our hands, we have to allow it. We have to have a dance. It's not just a one-sided thing. It's a multi-sided thing. It's actually has three parts. It's us, our partner, and the child that we're bringing in. And there is, so this is, we talk about stories. I have a lot of stories on signs and people connecting with their spirit babies that are like insane. They're so like specific, and the signs are so specific that you cannot argue with me that is not a true sign. Because some of the things that I see are like freaking incredible. And then I have even patients showing me the signs like, oh my God, look what I saw. I found this. And And I know their story. So I know like the story behind it and why the name that they're showing me on this magazine means something, because they've been telling me this whole time for like a year, maybe sometimes. So it's pretty wild. It's just when you open up to that, you start to allow the signs in, you start to allow the information. And so our nervous system is one thing that lives inside our bodies, but then there's another nervous system that connects infinitely. And so that's the communication that we have outside of us into this other realm of magic, so it's kind of like that nervous system keeps going. It's infinite.
Yeah. Well, what I love about that though, and what makes this such fascinating work that you do, is that it incorporates so many things on so many levels. Because where else would you be able to have a conversation about, a normal conversation about health, but also incorporate our spiritual connection to our kids and the signs, and it's literally eye-opening when you start looking into this world. And I mean, it hurts my heart to think of it as alternative. But then again, it also is kind of cool that it is, because it's acknowledging, hey, lady,
we're different.
You have an alternative to that dark and miserable story over here that is just as valid and probably way more resonant than what you're listening to here, which is just statistics and numbers and lacks humanity.
It lacks soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about what we're doing, both of us are in recovery from our type A kind of selves, but when you think about that, it really is a return to a higher sense of knowing, because, the conscious mind is what, 5%. It's like we think we're thinking all day, but we're really not. We're just replaying programs. It's not conscious. But what you're talking about here and inviting women to do is to become more aware. And when you're more aware, you're more conscious. And when you're more conscious, you can make better choices. And when you make better choices, you get better results. And I think that's like this really cool layering that you've done in the book and throughout the book. And it was funny because when I was thinking about your book, I'm like, what would I want women to do with your book? Like, I imagine like creating this sacred space in their home and setting aside time in their day to like lovingly sit with a hard copy of your book. It's great if they get an ebook. That's totally fine. But I think it's just so beautiful if they take the time and like mark the pages and write notes in the corner and really take this wisdom that you're sharing in this book and make it a ritual, and really take it like piece by piece and incorporate it into their lives very carefully, and know that it's so accessible, because what you're talking about is super accessible as well. Like it's not as complicated as it may sound. You've
simple.
made this super simple. So I don't know. Anyone listening, I think that's the ritual you should have with Michelle's book. I think you should, light a candle, make it special me time to like sit there and get a level of education that you might not otherwise have.
And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned ritual, because rituals are something that we have done throughout history. And I think that it's because we need it as humans. And the actual act of moving with meaning, there's something to that psychologically. And I think that there have been some studies on that. It really, and this is why somatic healing works so well, it's just kind of like the ritual of movement and having intention and doing something like an act that signifies a sacredness. And so doing that, I think, is really important. And then also going back to the whole consciousness thing, when you're conscious of something, when you bring awareness, you're actually feeding life force energy into that place. When we have blocks in our body, it's because that area of the body is not conscious. So when we start to focus our awareness into that area, we will start to actually release it. That's why the blessings, the energy blessing centers, or the blessings of the energy centers work so well with Dr. Joe Dispenza. It's that focusing our intention, becoming aware, acknowledging an area of our body, just our attention alone feeds life force vitality. This is why the media is a multi-billion-dollar industry because our attention is really, really forceful and powerful and has energy. It feeds. So when we do that with our bodies and really focus our attention on what we want, that is where we start to take our power back.
Wow. I'm really glad that you raised that because it's so true. It's so true. And because our attention, when it's focused, it's like a laser beam. When it's focused on the negative, when it's focused on what's wrong, and when it's focused on what I don't have, lack, scarcity, that's why we create more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when your focus is on healing, and when somebody is holding your book in their hand and they're getting educated and they're spending time learning about that healing, then they're going to notice more and they're going to take that intensely powerful attention and put it on something positive. I mean, that's why everyone needs to go out and get your book like right fucking now and make it a priority and say, hey, I'm going to incorporate this additional ritual into my life, because when I spend a little bit of time reading something here and taking in bits and pieces, then I can replace the negative focus with something really positive. Because, nature doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? So if you're removing something negative, you want to replace it with something positive. And everything that you're talking about in your book is really about returning the power back to the woman so that she doesn't have to be in fear and anxiety, and instead be more attuned to how she can remedy what's going on. So I just think it's fantastic. And I'm excited for the women listening to this to really dive into what you are sharing here. So now I know that your book is available on Amazon. Are there any other places that you wanted to mention? Is it being featured on your website or anything like that?
Yeah, so I can actually give you a link. I do offer first chapter for free if you guys want to take a test run. It goes into a little bit of my story, so I can give you the link to that.
Okay, great.
So basically the website of the book, and then it's going to give you a description, really explain a little bit more about what it is. But yeah, it's pretty much available everywhere.
Okay, that's awesome. And I hope you will have an Audible version soon.
Very soon. Well, I have to go back into that. That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole nother project, baby.
Yes.
That's a whole nother project. But, well, I'm so glad that you made the time to share this with us, Michelle. I mean, you're one of the few return guests. Like when I have somebody on more than once on my podcast saying something, but I'm just so delighted for you. I'm so proud of you, my friend, for what you've done. Writing a book is such a labor of love, and it really is a way of taking the wisdom that you have gathered over the decades of experience that you have, both personal and professional, and putting that into a book that, somebody can carry that around and take that wisdom and take that experience and really apply it to their lives to do good things. So thanks for doing good things, Michelle.
Roseanne, you are, first of all, such an inspiration to me, honestly, as a friend and a colleague. And I just really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the support that you give me. I really, truly do feel like we're like soul sisters of some sort. Like I felt an immediate connection with you. The first time we had a podcast swap happens to be on the same exact day that we scheduled. I remember that first time. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I'm like, okay, we're meant to meet. We're meant to connect. I love you. I really do.
I love you too.
The
synchronicities are crazy. The synchronicities are crazy. And just wait till women come to our event.
Oh, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Absolutely, no doubt. You are so badass. I love you.
I love you too. Well, so we're going to put a link to your book in our show notes, and we're super excited at what you're doing here and the good information that you're putting out in the world. So thank you, Michelle. And ladies, if you're listening and if you don't already have it, go get it. Go get it for 5 other friends. It's The Way of Fertility by my beloved Michelle Oravitz. So thanks, Michelle, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Roseanne.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.